you to all of you for joining us actually, we've been doing webinars for about 3 years now since our origins launching in the pandemic. And I think this is one of the greatest turnouts we've seen virtually. So it's an indication of two things. One, it's not just scary times because of Halloween, but because it is New York City public high school admission season. And also, it's just an indicator to us that there are many questions on this. And so it's also a reminder for us to do these more often. And we'll dive into some of the special cases that might direct some of that programming. But first, I just wanted to welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us on a Monday night, for putting pause on your busy lives, or maybe you're off camera and still tending to all the things that you must tend to. My name is Mitra Kalita. I'm the founder and CEO of Epicenter NYC. Epicenter is, as mentioned, we were formed in the pandemic as a way to help New Yorkers get through the pandemic. And then within a few months, quickly launched the Unmuted, which is our guide to all things New York City schools and student resources delivered in an approachable way, in an understandable manner, with insights from parents and educators, intentionally really kind of turning to all of you for questions and sometimes the answers as well. That's out every Wednesday. It's my honor tonight in that searching for answers to introduce my co-pilot for the evening, our expert, Alina Adams. She's a mom of 3 and the author of the book, Getting into NYC High School. She's also the producer of nycschoolsecrets.com, which features articles, podcasts, and videos covering all aspects of applying to public, private, charter, religious, and gifted schools in New York City. She's also a frequent contributor to the Unmuted. You've surely read her work if you subscribe to our newsletters. And we're going to have a conversation. We're kind of approaching this as 2 moms. I should have mentioned, besides being CEO and co-founder, my most important title in the world is mom of 2. I have 1 child in college and 1 child in middle school. And so you could selfishly say I organized this webinar just for me to understand what the heck is going on in New York City public schools. And some of my friends, I see you out there. But, we really do operate from information being empowering. And so I always say in New York City, you have 2 choices. You discover the secret to something, and you can either hoard that feeling for yourself, or you can shout about it from the rooftops. And so Epicenter and the Unmuted's philosophy very much is to shout about the information that we get from the rooftops, with the goal of uplifting all of our children. So that is really the objective of this webinar. And again, we're going to hope to do more of these. So that sort of sets us up for what we'll be doing for the next hour or so. And I wanted to turn it to Alina with the question of just how do New York City high school admissions work? Why don't we start at the beginning?
It's just short and limited.
Short. But because I think we're approaching this admittedly through the lens of confusion, scare, change, I just want to kind of, the front door question is like, actually, how do I get my kid into high school?
Well, the first thing that families should remember, and there's a quick thing, I'm looking at the chat right now, and it looks like all the text is going to just host and panelists rather than everyone. So I think it needs to be set to everyone so that everybody can see the links that we've been putting in so far. But other than that, the most important thing to remember is that every year since the pandemic began, there have been substantial changes in applying to public high school, which is why it's been so difficult for parents, because even if you've already applied an older child, let's say you applied a child 5 years ago, 3 years ago, last year, there have been changes each year. And the problem is people are getting their information from friends who may have done it 5 years ago when it was different, or even relying on the fact, well, I did this for my older child 2 years ago, it must be the same. It is not the same. So what we're going to be talking about tonight, and this is something that I always stress whenever I do these workshops, Anything that I say is true today may not be true tomorrow, and it certainly may not be true next year. You know, we were looking at our registrants, and there were people who were saying, I have a child in 6th grade, I have a child in 7th grade. Everything that I'm telling you tonight is true for this year only. So please don't take it as gospel in the sense that it'll never change. And maybe we'll be doing this next year, Mitra, and we'll be saying about all the things that are different. So what I'm saying tonight is only applying for this year. And here are the main things to know about applying to New York City public schools. First of all, there are the SHSAT schools, of which there are only 8. In Manhattan, it's Stuyvesant and the High School for Math, Science, and Engineering at City College. In Brooklyn, it's Brooklyn Tech and Brooklyn Latin. In the Bronx, it's Bronx Science and the High School for American Studies at Lehman College. In Queens, it's the school at York College. In Staten Island, it's Staten Island Tech. When we talk about the specialized high schools, it is only those schools, and those schools require the SHSAT only. I've heard people saying, how will my lottery number affect my placement in the SHSAT schools? It will not. The SHSAT schools have nothing to do with your lottery number. They are schools that, and since the deadline has passed, hopefully you have signed up already to take the SHSAT, and you have ranked only those schools on your child's sheet. You did not need to list all 8. It's not like it will nullify your application. If you don't, some people just put down 1 school, some people put down 3, it doesn't matter. Those are the SHSAT schools. Then we have LaGuardia, which yes, is a specialized school, but it does not require the SHSAT. LaGuardia is audition based, and you can apply for more than 1 program. You can get accepted into more than 1 program. You can only attend 1 program at LaGuardia. So it's entirely possible that you might get an offer from one of the SHSAT schools and from LaGuardia. Where it gets confusing is all of the other arts and audition schools, whether it's Frank Sinatra, whether it's Talent Unlimited, whether it's professional performing arts, whether it's an arts or music program in a school like Murrow, in a school like Fort Hamilton. All of those other programs fall under your 12 choices. It's SHSAT schools, LaGuardia, and the 12 choices. And the 12 choices are where your tier matter, where your lottery number matters, where your audition matters, where for some schools, the consortium schools, where an essay or an online exercise might matter, but all of them go on the same application and you get 12 choices. So when I say tier, when I say lottery number, what do I mean? Tier means that if your child had a GPA in 7th grade, at the end of 7th grade in their 4 core subjects, ELA, math, social science, and science, above a 94, they are in tier 1. So what that means is if your child had a 99 average, they have no advantage over a child that had a 95 average. They're all in 1 tier. Then there's tier 2 for kids with a lower GPA, tier 3, and tier 4. So those tiers are based on your child's grades in 7th grade only, not the SHSAT score and not any grades that they have in 8th grade. This is at the end of 7th grade.
And Alina, just on that point, is it 94 always, or does that change?
That changes. Thank you for asking. Not last year, it was 94, I believe, 0.33. So it's supposed to be the top 15% citywide is what it comes down to. So that number shifts just a little, but this year it's above 94. And then when we talk about lottery numbers, it's actually a misnomer. It's not a lottery number. You were given a number via lottery, but what that number is it's your place in line. It's your priority. So if you have, those of you who have had a chance to look at your number, it's a hexadecimal number. So don't worry about the whole hexadecimal. Only the first 2 digits matter. Numbers are better than letters. So the very, very best number is 00, then 01, then 02, and so on. And then when you run out of 9s, then you go into A, and B and all the way down to F. And I think we've been showing in the, we can put in the chat the link to Amelie Marion. She's a computer science professor at Rutgers who has been doing amazing work explaining what the numbers mean and what your numbers mean. And you can interpret it to see, am I in the top 10 percentile? I'm in the top 20th. Am I in the 50th? Am I? And sometimes, I mean, I had a client 2 days ago who said, prepare for the worst lottery number you've ever seen. And I looked at it and I saw that she was in the 97th percentile and said, ha, I have a client who's in the 98th percentile. So this is not the worst number I've ever seen. So, but that's what those letters and numbers will tell you. So those numbers, remember how I said a child with a 99 has no advantage over a child with a 95 in tier 1. What matters within your tier is your lottery number. And that is the priority in which they will look at the students. Also, many schools have set-asides for SWD, which is students with disabilities. Some schools set aside 20% of their seats. Some schools set aside a different number. Here's something super important. Just because your child has an IEP does not mean they automatically qualify for an SWD classification. They have to have an IEP that says they must be in an ICT classroom for 20%, a minimum of 20% of their days. So just an IEP does not automatically put you into SWD. And if your child has a 504, they're considered general ed. They're not students with disabilities. Also, if you qualify for free or reduced price lunch, some schools have a set aside 35%, 40%, 50%, 66%. And again, in Amelie Marion's document, she breaks it down. And when you go to the online site, the DOE site, and you can search by school, they will tell you how many seats they have for general ed, how many seats they have for students with disabilities, what their percentage is for priority to give to students who qualify for free or reduced price lunch. So those are all subcategories within the larger category of your tier and your lottery number.
And just on this, so I just wrote down your tier, which is determined by your average in 7th grade, the lottery number, which you really have no control over, and then an audition, an essay,
well, that's different. So
okay, so that's not a fixed, it's not a guarantee that you have to do that to get into one of those 12. Can you just
here's the thing. On the 12 goes schools that are screened. Screened means either they just look at grades, which usually means your tier. Some schools will look at other factors, like they might, like Bard, Queens and Manhattan, and Townsend Harris, they request videos, and there's a writing prompt. A school like Beacon, which is part of the consortium schools, or East Side Middle Schools, they ask for an essay. A school like Nest asks for an essay, and it looks at your grades. So all those schools, basically any school that is not a specialized school, goes on that list of 12. But let's say you have a terrible number. You have a terrible lottery number, but your child is an excellent writer. Your strategy might be to focus more on schools that put much more weight on the essay than they do on your lottery number and on your grade level. Also, like, let's say you're in tier 2 or tier 3, but your child's an excellent writer. The same thing is for audition schools. If you have a terrible lottery number, one way to get around that is to focus on schools that look at other materials, including auditions. But the lottery numbers still play a role in that they break ties. Let's say there's a lot of kids who have an essay which received the same score, then the lottery number comes into play again. But you can be in tier 3 with a terrible lottery number, but if you have a wonderful essay, you will still be ahead of a kid who's in tier 1 and has a great lottery number, but has a lower score on the essay than you do.
Got it. So, and I just want to call out that you mentioned IEPs and special needs, which we have a lot of questions ahead of time on. Just to be fairer about that, I think we should probably plan another session with someone who's an expert, because number of questions.
It's a whole different world.
It's a whole different process, it sounds like. So, so that is so those of you tuning in on that, keep your questions on that coming. We're going to try to address them in another session. We can also revisit some of that. Zooming out from what was actually very clear in my head in a way that was not before, but zooming out, can you tell us how you determine what a good school is anyway?
Okay. Well, there's the global you and there's the personal you, and I will actually talk to you about both. So, one of the things is I get asked constantly by parents that I work with, what's the best school? And the answer I give sounds like a platitude, but I 100% believe it. The best school is the school that's best for your child. Because the fact is, there are so many different types of schools that do different things. But you said zoom out. Let's zoom in for a moment. This is how I like to frame this for people. If you lived almost anywhere else in the country, your child would go to the zoned high school in your neighborhood, public, obviously. That's just what would happen. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depends on how you look at it, in New York City, there are 400 separate public high schools and 700 programs within them. So there becomes this pressure for parents to find the ideal, perfect, amazing school when it's not something you would even be thinking about if you lived anywhere else and just went to the zone high school. So I have parents, because I work privately with parents as well, and parents say to me, okay, the school needs to be within a 15-minute commute of my house. It needs to have 400 students total. It needs to offer band with cello. It should have AP classes, science competitions, a literary magazine, and a pool. You're going to drive yourself insane, and there is no such thing. One of the things that I always stress to parents in New York City, schools come down to three things. One is location, how far you're willing to travel. Two is money, and money does not mean paying for private school necessarily. Money means moving. Money means hiring a private bus to take your kid to school because it's far away. Money means hiring tutors to either prep them to get into a school, to keep up at the school, or if the school doesn't offer enough academics to do outside enrichment. And the third is what the school actually offers. Nobody gets all three. The richest of the rich do not get all three. You have to think about which one are you going to drop first. So rather than drive yourself crazy, I have seen people showing me spreadsheets with 15 different categories. I strongly urge you, I cannot tell you what to do. I can strongly urge that you pick 1, 2, 3 at most factors and just use those to compare apples to apples rather than apples to oranges. So when I said I would speak to the personal you, my daughter, actually, she's my youngest of 3, and I was applying her the first pandemic year. Basically, even though the pandemic happened in 2020, paperwork was already in by March, so I don't count that. So my daughter was applying 2021, the first pandemic year when we didn't know anything and they didn't even start the process until the spring. But all I did was I had 2 factors. One was location, ease of commute. We live on the Upper West Side. And 2 was you can look at lots of different metrics at the school. Here are metrics I care about, and here are metrics I don't care about. I don't care how many students graduate in 4 years, because I know that public schools shove kids through the system, and 50% of the kids who graduate in New York City are not ready to do college level work. And when I say college level work, I don't mean Harvard or MIT, I mean City College. So I don't care how many kids graduate in 4 years. It's a useless metric. The only metric that matters to me, and even then it's difficult to prove, but it's something, is how many kids graduate college ready. That's it. I looked at 2 metrics. How far was it from my house? Also, my daughter is a competitive rhythmic gymnast. So how far was it from her gym? Because she needs to go back and forth. So location. And the college readiness number. And it came down to this. I set my floor at 75%. I said, I want a school where at least 75% of kids are graduating college ready. And the further away the school was from my house, the higher the college readiness rate would have to be. The closer the school was to my house, the lower of a college readiness rate I would tolerate. And that's it. Otherwise, it would have driven me insane trying to hit any other, multiple metrics.
So one interesting area that comes up over and over as I speak to parents, and this is kindergarten, middle school, high school, is commute time. Mm-hmm. And in our case, starting with kindergarten, both of our kids ended up commuting. The eldest more than an hour, the second one almost an hour. And so it's just like a part of their lives from a very young age. For a lot of parents, that's not their reality. So I guess I'm wondering, how do you know your comfort with traversing the city? How do you, is that a personal decision? Do you feel like a New York City kid, by the time you're 14 years old, like you'll learn the subway. Like what are your thoughts on that?
Well, it has to do with what you would be doing with that time otherwise. As I mentioned, my daughter isn't a competitive rhythmic gymnast, so for her, I actually ended up finding a school that was exactly equal distance between our house and her gym. With my younger son, he was in a pre-professional dance program. So for him, he needed to get home as fast as possible. So the school we sent him to is just a school that was 5 stops on the express train. With my older son, it was the flip of that. My older son actually did all of his activities at school. He did theater, he did Model UN, he did newspaper. So for him, it had to be a place where when he was at school until 9 or 10 or 11 o'clock at night, which they sometimes are for some of these activities, the commute home would be safe. There'd be a train that was running, but sometimes it's completely different. For some families, some kids do their homework on the train. For some kids, that hour-long commute is great because then they do their homework and they come home and they don't have to do anything else. So it's not, commute time isn't in a vacuum. Commute time is what would you otherwise be doing with that time? How could that time be used? But as I said, sometimes the issue of money comes in. Like for instance, people hire private buses to go up to Bronx Science from various neighborhoods and that sort of thing. So it becomes, what does that time mean to you? But if you're asking as far as safety, then that's an issue for every family individually.
Got it. You mentioned that because of the changes, you've heard a lot of misinformation going on. I just wondered if we could like debunk a few myths real quick.
Yes,
while we got you. Yeah. What have you been doing and what's the truth?
Okay. My personal favorite. I have a couple of personal favorites. So every year I get this call. They go, I heard that they have to give you one of the schools on your list. So I have a brilliant idea. Do you want to guess what the brilliant idea is?
Only putting schools that are
only put down one school.
Oh,
no, one
okay.
school. Parents tell me I'm only going to put down one school. And since they have to give you a school off your list, I've beat the system. You have not. That is not true. They absolutely do not have to give you one of the schools on your list. In fact, it's possible that you won't get one of the schools on your list. The other thing is, people say, I figured out how to beat the algorithm. My first choice school only has 35 seats, but my fourth choice school has 250 seats. So I'm going to put it first, so I'm more likely to get that school. No. People like to ask this question in every which way. Whenever I do a workshop, it comes at me 5, 7 different people, all changing their words just a little bit to see if they'll trip me up and get me to change what I say. But I will never, ever, ever go back on rank in the order you truly prefer, because you will be given your first available choice. The computer does not know that the school you put forth is actually your first choice. And here's what happened. If you get the school ahead of it, you will never even get a crack at the school behind it, and you won't be waitlisted. You are waitlisted for every school you put ahead of the one you got. So if you got your 7th choice, you are waitlisted for your 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th choice. You are not waitlisted for your 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th choice. You can add yourself to the wait list later, but you will be time-stamped and put behind all the people who initially had it on their list and were waitlisted there. So there is nothing. I say this over and over again because people tend to not want to hear me. There is nothing to be gained by trying to game the system. You must rank in the order you truly prefer. Parents say to me, is there any point in putting down a school I have little chance of getting into? And my response is, if you don't put it down, you have no chance. So what is the point of that? That said, you have to be realistic. Now that we can see our lottery numbers, you can make realistic choices. My rule of thumb is this. Top 3, 1, 2, 3, dream schools pie in the sky, don't care how the odds are against you. These are your dream schools. It's what I did for my daughter. I put her in a school that was I put first a school that was a 6 to 12, which means they take very few students in 9th grade because most of the time their 8th graders have priority. And when I opened the email and she had gotten her first choice, I texted my husband and I said, we're Catholic now. And he said, why? And I said, because my Hail Mary play worked. So absolutely first 3 choices for 2 reasons. 1, because they're genuinely your first 3 choices. And 2, because you want, if you have a terrible lottery number now, you draw a new lottery number for the wait list. And maybe you'll get lucky and you draw a fantastic number. And I can tell you families I worked with last year who had very bad numbers, pulled some very good numbers and ended up getting into schools that usually are very, very high priority. So that's definitely something that can happen. So top 3, genuinely your top 3 choices. Bottom 3, safeties. Those are schools that have 1, 2, maybe 3 applicants per seat that you have a very good shot of getting into. Middle 6 is where you really strategize. If you have an excellent number, but you're in a lower tier, like a 2 or 3 or 4, then what you want to do is you want to go for an ed opt school, which is a school that takes a third of their students from the highest tier. Oh, it's actually 1 and 2 together. A third of their students from the middle tier, which is tier 3, and a third of their students from the bottom tier, which is tier 4. So if you have an excellent number, but a low tier, you have a very good chance at getting into an ed opt school. On the other hand, if you have a terrible number, but even if you are in a good tier, what you want to do is, as I talked about, you might want to try a school that has an essay, or you might want to try a school that asks for a video response, or you might want to try for an audition school. So in those 6 is where you strategize. Top 3, dream schools, doesn't matter what your odds are. Bottom 3, safeties. Middle 6, depending on whether you have more of an advantage with your tier, with your lottery number, or with your supplemental materials.
And Alina, when you're making this list, is there somewhere you're going to see what schools even might fit that profile? I know you gave us some of your parameters. I just don't want to presume that people know where to even go to source the list of schools.
Well, the DOE does have their own.
I think for myself, because I don't think I know.
Well, the DOE, you go to the My Schools.
My Schools,
you go to My Schools and you can enter school names. You can also, I think, sort. You can put in like asking for screen schools or asking for art schools. And then you have their stats, which I find a wee bit inflated or aspirational, but they're somewhere in the ballpark. I personally like inside schools because inside schools tends to have harder data. My husband, who's a math teacher, likes to say big is not a number. So I'm also not a big fan of good as a quantifier, but inside schools tends to have school test scores. They tend to have other safety numbers and all sorts of things. I'm not a huge fan of grade schools simply because grade schools takes into their algorithm comments. And I've just been doing this long enough where I know that one angry parent can write 5 anonymous negative comments, or one person who works in the front office can write 5 anonymous happy comments. So I would much rather look at hard metrics. I mean, parents' comments gives you an idea, but I find, as we all know, people very rarely comment if they're okay. People comment if they're pissed off, and that can give you a warped sense. So those are the websites. My Schools and Inside Schools are my personal favorites.
I just wanted to turn to the chat, like on some rapid fire questions, and then we're going to turn to parents that are going to come on and ask some more. If you're not in a 7th grade public school, an independent private school that does not use conventional grades, where might they draw from? Does that sound like
they are going to you're going to have to, and I work with this all the time. A lot of the progressive private K-8s don't give number grades. You have to go to your school, and they're going to have to convert them.
They'll convert them.
Tell them to do it. Yeah.
7th grade, we answered that question. There's another question about LaGuardia. Do they use GPA? And if so, what's that number?
They do, but at the very, very bottom, as long as you have a minimum of a 65, it used to be an 85. As I said, things are constantly changing. It used to be you needed a minimum of an 85. Now, as long as you have a minimum of a 65, the only thing that matters is your score on your audition or your portfolio or whatever you're doing.
Someone asked about the college readiness metric that you referenced. Is that the percentage of students enrolled in college or career programs?
Yes, different sources call it different things, but yes, that's the one I'm using.
This one has come up a lot recently in our coverage writ large. Is the normal class size for public high schools 30 children?
I will tell you without mentioning the school that my daughter is currently in a school where she says they've got 40 kids in one class and 70 kids in a PE class. I said, how do you get anything done? She said, we just sit. Yeah. So what the real number is has nothing to do with the reality on the ground. And it can go up as, I think legally it can go up to 35, but I've been hearing much larger numbers.
And then we have some questions like, what if you have a bad lottery number and tier 3? Can you be in tier 3, but in the high ed opt group?
No,
I guess, no. Okay.
That's just a simple one. Ed opt high is tier 1 and 2, and then 3 is its own and 4 is its own. So that's an easy one.
Those are separate. Okay. Actually, I had not heard of the ed opt group. So this is good information for you're already immensely valuable to me and probably hundreds of other people that are joining us. Okay. If a screen school has an essay that counts as 50%, what is the other 50%?
Usually that means the grade, which means tiers.
Okay.
Which means tiers, not they won't, again, a 99 won't give you an advantage over a 93. They'll assign a numerical value to your tier and factor it into the algorithm.
Okay, I think we can bring on the parent questions and then keep the questions in the chat coming. Even if we don't get to them in this conversation, there might be a way that we could.
I want to answer Lisa's question quickly. She said, what do I do if we are listed as EdOpt High and Tier 3 on our My Schools page? Go to your guidance counselor, because that sounds like a mistake in either one or the other. So your guidance counselor should be, your middle school guidance counselor should be the one who takes care of that.
All right, Danny, who we got?
Alrighty. So first up, we got Nicole Perino, the famous Bronx mama, and also the author of our Unmuted newsletter that goes out every Wednesday. Gonna bring you in, Nicole.
I also just want to address a quick question I saw, which said, is the lottery number we had for middle school the same one we will use for high school? No, it gets redrawn. So it may be better, but I come from the Soviet Union where the line is never asked for a better tsar. So we always go, well, it could also be worse, but it will not be the same number.
You're putting on Bronx Mama, so this Queen's Mama is putting on her Mets jacket. I just wanted to welcome you, Nicole. Go. Nicole, ask your question.
So just for those of us with kids in middle school, just what are some of the top things that we should be, thinking about this early on? I have a 6th grader. So just things to plan ahead with.
Okay, so that's a great question. Here are the main things. First of all, unless something changes, and you'll forgive me that I'm constantly using what my husband calls weasel words, but I want to be super clear that I cannot guarantee that this will not change. But assuming nothing changes, 7th grade is where you want to be focusing to make sure your child has all A's, because that is the one that's going to be used for the screen high school. So again, I am not someone who preps or tutors kids. I'm not trying to sell you a service, but I am telling you that if you're going to spend money on tutoring at any point, 7th grade would be the year to do it, because you want to make sure they have all A's. And the other question you want to think of if you want to do prep for the SHSAT, which is the specialized high school test, which is given in usually October or November of your 8th grade year. So most of the prep happens before that. And there are 3 things to think about. If your child already knows the material that is on the SHSAT, both the English questions and the math questions, then all they need to do is learn how to take the test, because the SHSAT is a weirdly worded test. So it's the kind of thing you can just buy some prep books. All of them have practice tests, and your kids can just spend the summer between 7th and 8th grade taking practice tests. If, on the other hand, your child knows all the material up to the new material that they need to learn on the SHSAT, then you might want to start SHSAT prep in 7th grade so that they are learning the material on the SHSAT and then can practice their tests over the summer. If, however, your child is so far behind that they need to learn the material before the material that you need to know before on the SHSAT, some people start SHSAT prep as early as 3rd grade. I know that's not what you asked, but if your daughter is in 6th grade, I'm sorry, did you say daughter or son? I misheard.
Daughter.
Yeah, it is currently in sixth grade. What you really want to see is whether they are learning the material that will set them up in seventh grade to learn the material that's on the SHSAT. So in sixth grade, you want to see if they're scoring, fours on their state tests, they're probably where they need to be. But if they're behind on that, then you want to start prep right away because they have to learn the material before the material on the SHSAT.
I was going to ask, how do you know? So it's the state tests, and would you do like a practice SHSAT at home?
You can, yeah. These books, you can get them on Amazon. They're not some top secret thing. You can get them on Amazon. Most of them have practice tests. Have your child take one. Also, there's testing prep centers that will come in and administer a mock because these tests are timed. That's something else you need to think about. Sometimes the kids know the material, but they don't know how to pace themselves to do it. So there are places that do mock SHSAT that will do a diagnostic SHSAT, and then you can decide from there.
Do you have a favorite SHSAT book by any chance?
You know what? I will send that to you, Mitra, because my son actually wrote a piece about what his favorite was, and I can't remember right now. I will send it to you.
We'll put that. That's a good note. We could put that in our newsletter. And
yeah, I will send that to you.
That's great. Okay, we can. Well, one other thing, just on the middle school note. Thank you, Nicole. Is that it sounds like you're saying seventh grade is where you're going to, just to be super clear and underscore, seventh grade is where you're focusing your energies on their GPA, the SHSAT prep. Do they know, are they kind of, getting fours or, so that feels like the year that you're saying to focus on. So that's really stressful for me as the mom of a seventh grader. Thank you. What's our next question, Danny?
So the next person we have up is Murray Abelis, father of two.
Hi, Murray.
Hey, Murray, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you.
Murray, where are you sitting right now?
I am sitting in a closet that has been reformed for my office in the pandemic. Very fancy. But one of the very quiet places in the home where I can ask questions.
Your space is your space. Take it.
Exactly.
Murray, what's your question?
So thank you so much. This is an incredible wealth of knowledge. I likewise have a seventh grader, and we are doing all the pre-panic before the panic of eighth grade, right? One specific question. Our girls have gone to Catholic school since kindergarten, right? They get graded traditionally, so on a number grade basis. Are there any nuances you could speak to for students going from private to public, and what that transition might be in terms of how it impacts the admissions and so forth? Or is it just really make sure you got the best grades? We're doing, the tours already and so forth, but any guidance on that would be helpful.
The machine does not differentiate between students who come from private school and students who come from public school. I work with a wide swath of parents, and I have had parents in private schools get really good numbers, and I've had parents in private schools get really bad numbers. So I do not think there's any kind of prejudice on the machines part. The biggest problem comes is that sometimes private schools tend to be more rigorous, either academically or they grade more harshly. So this is the year in seventh grade where, while you might have let an A- slide, is the year to say, well, can she do any extra credit? What can she do to get this grade to above a 95? Because with private schools, sometimes and this is a problem, to be fair, across the board. If I can just go a little bit general, Murray, from your question is, for instance, I work with families where their kids are in the citywide gifted and talented programs. And I had one family where the child had taken algebra in seventh grade and he got a B. But when the algorithm looked at it, it did not differentiate in any way between a child who got a B in algebra in seventh grade and a child who got an A in arithmetic in seventh grade. So this is the year, since some private schools tend to grade more harshly, to really make sure that the numbers are there, where to be safe, I'd say above a 95. There is no, as I said, there's no difference in the numbers that you get. It's random. The biggest change tends to come when kids transition from smaller private schools, which just tend to be even smaller than the smaller high schools. Mm-hmm. And besides the fact that they're just in a bigger building, there's also a lot less hand-holding, not just because it's high school, but because it's a large public high school. So kids who are used to getting a level of feedback might feel a little lost in a public school. I've heard from people who say that teachers are returning papers 3-4 months after they were turned in. So how is a kid supposed to get feedback on that? So the main thing you want to prepare your kids for if they're going to transition from private school to public school is to teach them to advocate for themselves and to make sure that they're keeping an eye on their work, because they're not going to have the safety net that they might have gotten used to in the past.
Such good advice. That's actually good
Incredibly
advice
helpful.
for a lot of these schools. Yeah. Thank you, Murray.
Thank you.
Flaviana next. Is Flaviana ready?
We have Flaviana Leonardes, mother of 3. Hola, ¿qué tal, Flaviana?
Hola.
Buenas tardes. Hola, buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Flaviana, soy madre de 3 hijos. La primera graduada del college, la segunda se gradúa el próximo año y el tercero que está en 8º grado. La pregunta sería,
Flaviana, ¿puedes esperar un momentito? Vamos a
okay.
So Flaviana just said she's a mother of 3. She has 1 child in college. The second child I didn't quite catch. And the third, Danny, help me out here. I'm like trying to translate, but I'm also like thinking ahead. Is in 8th grade?
¿Lo puedes repetir, por favor?
Sí, la segunda se gradúa próximo año y
Next
el
one.
tercero 9º grado. 8º grado.
The next one of them graduates next year, and the other one graduates in the 8th grade. Is in the 8th grade.
Okay, puedes seguir.
Entonces, el proceso de aplicaciones para high schools desde la primera ahora es muy diferente. Ahora todo es en línea, todo es con crear una cuenta. Pero mi pregunta es, ¿cómo ayudar a escoger al niño una high school cuando el niño no sabe qué estudiar, no sabe qué programas? Tengo entendido que tengo que escoger 12 programas, all right? Máximo.
She's saying, she's saying, how does a student choose a program when they don't even know what they want to study? So many of the programs are asking for like an area of interest, but if a student doesn't know, what are they supposed to do? Flaviana, está bien?
Will you translate Spanish, or should I just speak in English and then?
I think speak in English, and then we can make sure that she gets a translation in Spanish. I also don't want to screw it up, and I'm just cognizant of time.
Okay. The most important thing is every kid is interested in something. When I hear parents say she's doing nothing, it's impossible to do nothing. Even if she is just scrolling through TikTok, then maybe she would be interested in a school that has media or filmmaking. If she just likes to listen to music, there are schools that have music production. So kids are being asked what they're interested in. It doesn't have to be one of the 4 main subjects. She doesn't have to say, I love physics or I want to write a novel. She can, I feel you're understanding because you're laughing. She must be interested in something. And that is what her video should be about, because they're looking for passion and they're looking for kids who can express themselves. She might have an opinion about a political issue. She might have an opinion about a social issue, or she might be interested in fashion design. And all of those things are real things to speak about.
Flaviana, ¿tienes más preguntas o está bien?
Pues esa es la pregunta, pero como hay muchos niños que se estresan porque dicen, si yo no voy a estudiar después, o sea, no voy a estudiar una carrera larga o tener un máster, entonces, ¿por qué ya tengo que escoger los programas ahora? O sea, como puedo ir a una high school, solo ir a la high school y tomar las clases y ya, o sea, es obligatorio que tengan que escoger los programas, sí o no, sí o sí.
Yeah, she's saying that for some same question, similar kind of theme of if you're going to end up doing a master's program in some of these specialized areas anyway, you know, how do you make sure that you get a general education, which I think you just, but it's interesting because you answered it to say students have these areas of interest. You didn't answer it, but maybe maybe this is where you might be able to help us. are there just generally good high schools, right? Okay, so Flaviana entiende, ¿no? Okay.
Most of them, the flip side to what I just said,
Yeah.
is that most of them are perfectly fine general high schools. I often have parents say to me, oh, my child is not a math and science person, so I don't want her in a school with math and science in the title. But you have to understand, all the titles of all the schools are meaningless. There is a school called the Bronx High School for Violin and Dance, where there is no violin teacher and there is no dance teacher. So all of these titles are made up. And one of the things that I like to stress is, even if it has lots of science words in the title, remember, they still have to take the general curriculum, which is English, which is history, which is a language, and which is an art, which means the majority of any school day is humanities. Now, some schools might have a robotics program, or they might have a computer programming class, but still the fundamental general program is going to be the same at all schools.
Thank you. Gracias.
Yes,
¿Estás de
yes,
acuerdo?
Sí.
All right.
Muchísimas gracias, Fabiana.
Yes, yes. So I'm just trying to get us, we have about 10 minutes left. I'm trying to get us into a little bit more of the questions that were
I want to answer Renee's question quickly. It says,
Yeah,
if you
go
apply
for
to
it.
programs in one school and you get accepted to the fourth one listed, will they waitlist you for the above three? Yes. When you think of separate programs within a school, think of them as really separate schools in one building. I will also tell you that at many schools, principals tell you flat out, apply to all our programs, make sure you get into one, and then once you're here, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, we can see if we can move you into another program. That's not a guarantee. It's not official, but lots of principals will tell you that. So if you love a school, I do recommend applying to more than one program.
I want to point out too that there's a question that is in the Q&A. It says, do you think the attendance will come back into play for admissions for non-specialized schools next year? I.e., should we worry about it in 7th grade?
I don't think so. That was actually in play and was removed pre-pandemic. A lot of people didn't want it. Also, it's really hard to keep track of attendance. I don't think that would be an issue. I've heard this from parents. They say, can I go on vacation? I'm sure. I don't think attendance will be an issue.
Well, that's good to hear, because my kids already missed 6 days of school from strep throat. So it's been one of those years already.
Yeah, I do, especially in the past, they might have principals used to urge kids to come to school sick just so they could mark them there for the budget. Now nobody's encouraging kids to come to school sick. So I don't think it's going to be an issue.
Alina, you alluded to this earlier, and we have some questions that were pre-submitted around waitlist strategies. So I just want to be clear. It sounds like you're saying there's actually a separate process or separate lottery once you're on a wait list. Explain what that means.
It's a continuation. It's not a separate process because, again, people might remember that in the past, there was a whole second round where you applied to schools. That the second round doesn't exist anymore. But what happens is not only are you waitlisted for all the schools that you put ahead of the one that you got, you can also add yourself to wait lists of other schools after the first round has completed, and you get a new number. This is the most important thing. The first year they did waitlist, you had the same numbers. So it was very unproductive. But now you get a new number. So for instance, there was a question here is only another question from Renee, do only tier 1 kids have a chance at screen program? It really depends on what the screen program is, but I'll give you an example. So a school like Eleanor Roosevelt, incredibly popular school in District 2 on the east side. I have a lot of families from Queens who apply there. I have a lot of families from the Bronx who apply there. Extremely popular school. In the first round, you needed a really, really good number, like a 0-0 or a 0-1, and to be in tier 1, both, to get into Eleanor Roosevelt. But in the second round, I was working with a family where the child had a terrible number, like in the bottom 5%, but they pulled a really good number for the wait list for Eleanor Roosevelt because it had been in their top 3, as remember I mentioned. So while wait lists are not a guarantee, and some schools did not go to their wait list last year. But for instance, really popular schools did. Millennium did, Clinton did, Eleanor Roosevelt did, Columbia Secondary School did. So if it really is your first, second, or third choice, I'm going to stress again, put it in that top 3, because maybe you'll get super lucky and you'll pull a great number and you'll get in off the wait list. But something to keep in mind, those wait lists move up through the first, I think even second or third week in September. So your child might start in one school, and then that first or second week, because some people register and they just don't come because there's no penalty to not coming to a public school. You might need to then make a decision the second week. I had one family where the mother emailed me that they got like off the wait list off, one of their top 3 schools, and should we do it? And my response was yes, and don't look back. But you have to be mentally prepared for the fact that you might get a wait list offer the first or second week of school. And here's a little fun wrinkle. Let's say you opted for Catholic school or private school. You will have by that point signed a contract where you pretty much owe them possibly a year's worth of tuition. Different schools have different contracts. So keep that in mind. If your goal is to get off the wait list, weigh that against paying for a Catholic or independent school.
You mentioned Eleanor Roosevelt and families from Queens. Is there a way, so it sounds like Manhattan schools, I don't know if you went over this, but Manhattan schools don't give preference to Manhattan families, but Brooklyn, Queens, and maybe the Bronx.
Yes, that's the irony. Brooklyn, many Brooklyn schools have Brooklyn priority, and some of them even have zoned priority. Many Queens schools have Queens priority, and some of them even have zoned priorities. Manhattan no longer has Manhattan priority, and I believe it has no zone schools left. Yeah, so Eleanor Roosevelt is an excellent example. There used to be District 2 priority. So parents pretty much living in District 2 had a much easier shot of getting into Eleanor Roosevelt in the past than they do now. That's one of those things that I was talking about, that if you speak to your friend who applied her child 7 years ago, she'll say, oh, you live on the East Side, you have priority for Eleanor Roosevelt. You do not. You do not have any priority for a Manhattan school anymore.
How involved should children be in this process? They are children after all, and yet...
Depends on your child. So my oldest one did it all by himself. He had a spreadsheet, he had a choice, but he's that kid, oldest child. That they should tell you everything you need to know, my oldest child. With my younger one, it was like pulling teeth. It was like, write this statement, write this statement. When he went to take the SHSAT, he came back and I asked him, did you rank in the order you prefer? And he said, I rank in the order you prefer. So that's how that went. With my daughter, I basically, she said, do whatever you want. I said, no, you're going to do some work for this. But there were some schools, like, I don't know what it was, iSchool, they had a prompt. She said, and I quote, this prompt hurts my soul. I don't know what that means, but she did not want to write the prompt for iSchool. So we did not do a prompt for iSchool. She wrote the ones that she liked. She did, like, for the auditions, what she was interested in, but I did the ranking because she said, do whatever you want. So it really depends on your kid. Here is something I will tell you. Do not write the essay for your kid, because sometimes parents will send it to me to take it, look it over. And I'm reading this essay and it had a quote, I want to say from Cicero. And I said to the dad, did your kid really say this? And the dad goes, well, no, but I thought that's what he meant. So I thought I'd do it. Believe me, if I can catch that it wasn't written by a kid, the schools can tell it wasn't written by a kid.
There's another question in the Q&A. Does a family who put a school in the initial round get priority over the ones who added themselves for that school later on the waitlist round, all rest equal? Or does the new lottery number only play a role then? It sounds like you're saying...
No, if you put it on your first list ahead of the one you got, not behind, ahead of the one you got, you have priority. Everyone who adds themselves afterwards gets added in timestamp order, regardless of lottery number.
Yeah. Okay. One area that is like kind of the reason for Epicenter's existence, but also many of these changes were prompted by an effort for our schools to be more diverse and inclusive, right? I guess I just wonder, like, a year and a half into this new system, is it working in your opinion? And
well,
why don't we start there, and then I'll ask you the second part of that.
Well, we were talking about Eleanor Roosevelt used to mostly accept middle-class kids from the Upper East Side. The first year they went open, they accepted more middle-class kids from the Upper West Side. So, Beacon, for instance, used to be an Upper West Side priority. So they used to accept middle-class kids from the Upper West Side. Then the first year they were open, they accepted some middle-class kids from Brooklyn. I have not seen the needle moving in any substantial way, because with the and here's the other thing. People say, well, what about the diversity, equity, and inclusion set aside? It's, some schools are taking up to 60%, 66% of kids who qualify for free or reduced price lunch. Well, 70% of the students in the New York City public school system qualify for free or reduced price lunch. So that number is organic to the schools. It's still what it is, because they're already accepting the numbers that already exist in the system.
And if you are, as many parents who've decided to stay in New York City to raise their children, valuing diversity in our children's schools, is there anything as we're going through this process to not, I hope I can curse, it's my webinar, I think I can, to not be privileged assholes in the process, but also advocate for our child at the same time that we're advocating for diversity? I just wonder whether you have strategies around that, or you've seen things that work for schools that are perhaps more diverse.
You'd have to be willing to go to a school where the college readiness number is lower. It's as simple as that. You'd have to go to a school where the majority of students qualify for free or reduced price lunch. And I was talking to someone the other day, and she said to me, well, what are some of the schools that our kids deserve to go to? And I said, well, let's take the word deserve out of the equation, because all students deserve to go to a good school. Now, what's a good school? Here's the thing, because I talk to hundreds of people, different people have a different opinion of what a good school is. For some parents, it's just that the school is physically safe. For some parents, it's that the school has a very involved community. For some parents, is that there's a lot of social emotional support. For some parents, it's that it has a lot of AP classes. So here's the problem. Actually, it's not a problem. Here's the situation. Different people want different things. And I personally think people should be allowed to have different things. And I also think there's a really big problem with what the Department of Ed classifies as diverse, because, for instance, they will tell you a school like Stuyvesant is not diverse, even though it's a school where I believe close to 50% of the students qualify for free and reduced price lunch. So if you use that as an index, it's actually a lot more diverse than a school like Beacon, or a school like Millennium, or a school like Eleanor Roosevelt. And if you walk down the halls, you might hear 15, 16 different languages, including with kids translating for their parents, which is something that I did because I wasn't born in the US. So I maybe I just relate to that, but I hear it, kids translating I used to go with my parents to my brother's parent-teacher conferences so that I could translate. But because many of these students are Asian, sometimes the Department of Ed says, well, all Asians are the same, so the school is not diverse. We also need to reevaluate what our definition of diversity is before we announce that New York City is wrong. And New York City has many things wrong with it. We'll do a whole other webinar on all the things that are wrong with New York City. But the fact is, some of the boxes people are put into and some of the classifications are wrong too.
Yeah, I think and we've written about this, the kind of the push for disaggregated data in the Asian community, and also, who wants more Black and Latino kids at Stuyvesant? A lot of Asian students, right? So there are, I think it is, I think that it's a little bit complicated on some of these issues. I guess I'm wondering if you've seen examples where there's some inclusion or integration or magical numbers that have resulted, and it sounds like it's still too early.
Well, I'll tell you where the magical numbers are, and this actually starts at the middle school level, is that when all middle schools were unscreened during the pandemic, they went flat, all of them. And then in the last couple of years, actually the last 2 years, schools were allowed to decide whether they wanted to screen or not. And the schools that didn't want to screen were schools in the very wealthy neighborhoods, the Upper East Side, Tribeca, Upper West Side. Although when I say didn't want to, there were a lot of parents who did, but the superintendents said no. You know what schools did want to screen? Schools in Harlem, schools in Washington Heights, schools in Bed-Stuy, because they understood that screening doesn't mean that Black and Hispanic students can't reach that bar. So we have Columbia Secondary School and Mott Hall and some other schools that I'm blanking on right now that are in District 4, District 5, District 6 in areas of Brooklyn and areas of South Brooklyn, which is much, much poorer. So it's very interesting that it's the schools that already have a majority population of Black and Hispanic students because of where they are physically located, know that their students are perfectly capable of getting high scores. And it's the schools on the East Side and the West Side and in Brownstown, Brooklyn that says, oh, they couldn't possibly do it without our help. We have to be there to guide the way for them. So I find that breakdown very interesting.
I want to give you the last word as we're wrapping up here. Are there any you do the New York City secret schools, right? Are there any
NYC school secrets, the website?
Are there any secret tips or things that you're like, this is so obvious, people really need to play this hand? Is there anything that comes to mind in that regard?
Just what I said before about people not trying to game the system and thinking that there's some ways that they can beat the algorithm, but looking at the schools at location, at the cost of getting there and what the school is actually about, and actually genuinely putting down, I'll say this over and over again, ranking in the order that they prefer, because that is the best way to maximize your chances of getting the school that you want. Don't listen to people who say, well, I get this question all the time. Actually, I'm going to end with this because this is a question I get all the time. People say to me, but if I put a school fourth, won't a person who put it first have an advantage over me? And the answer is no, because if you put the school fourth, but your lottery number is better than the person who put it first, you're going to get this school ahead of them. So this is a question that I answer over and over again. And people keep trying to ask me in different words to see if they'll trip me up or catch me in a mistake. And the answer is no. Rank in the order you truly prefer. Putting a school fourth does not disadvantage you. The lottery number is still the key deciding factor, or the essay or the audition, or whatever. So please don't try to outthink the algorithm and convince yourself that putting a school first will give you an advantage. Someone could put a school 12th, but if they have a better lottery number than you and you put it first, they will get it, and vice versa.
So that is my key takeaway, is that your list really needs to be in the order that you want, which I've heard from you a number of times, but really has kind of sunk in as something that was like weighing on me in terms of gaming. You're almost telling me to like undo some of that and really do what really rank in the order that you want.
Everything I said, that was my last word. I lied. Here's the last word, but it builds on that. Make this easy for yourself. Everything that I hear, people are complicating the process for themselves. Like they're using 17 different metrics instead of 2 or 3. They're trying to outthink the algorithm instead of just ranking in the order they prefer. So my goal in life is, you said at the very beginning, you can either keep information to yourself or you can share it. I call myself the Paul Revere of New York City schools. I run through the streets yelling, you have choices. You have more choices than you think. So this is me. This is the most important piece of information I can give you. Make this easier for yourself. Make this as easy as possible. And the way to make this as easy as possible, the way to not drive yourself crazy, is to truly link a list in the order you prefer and to only use 1, 2, or 3 metrics to compare the schools rather than trying to compare 20 schools on 20 different metrics.
Yeah, that's so important. One other tip just popped into my head, which was in the spring of my daughter's 7th grade year, we did do some tours of specialized high schools, not because I wanted her to judge whether she'd want to go there or not, as much as to motivate her to study for the SHSAT, which served its purpose. She was very impressed. And so I just remembered the spring of 7th grade kind of being the year that these conversations started.
Although, again, to make your life easier, for what it's worth, what we didn't
Oh,
even
yeah,
choose
that's right.
any schools
told me
until
you
after
didn't.
the
Yeah.
kid had got in. No, why fall in love with a school you might not get into? Instead, rank them based on just whatever your own personal metrics are. And then once the kids got in, we visited the schools and then we compared them.
One last question. I know we could do this all night long, but I'm going to let this really be the last question. But I think this is important. My son only cares about basketball and sports culture. How would I search that in Brooklyn and New York City? Meaning some of the things that kids care about are not on Inside Schools, My Schools, or Great Schools. But
they are on My Schools. You can search by what sports teams the school has.
My sports teams. Okay, so that's the answer. My schools. Thank you, Alina. This was so fabulous. I hope everybody who's still with us subscribes to our newsletter, follows us on Instagram, follow Alina. She's a wealth of information. Her information is in the chat, alinaadams@gmail.com, nycschoolsecrets.com, my email. I'm about to post Mitra at epicenter-nyc.com. Danny, what am I forgetting on all the shout outs? Are we good?
I would say make sure to also catch Nicole Perino's Instagram reels every Friday on social media. She does a great job and takes a lot of this information, makes it entertaining. I laugh at them constantly. So check them out Friday at 4.
Thank you all for joining us. Have a lovely night and a happy Halloween.
Yes. Bye, everybody.